Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first edition of Ask Kibler. If you guys missed it, not that long ago, I solicited questions on social media. I get a lot of questions when I'm streaming, in YouTube comments, etc., because I've been involved in the gaming and streaming and competitive and design worlds for a very long time. Which, as I joked in my video about this series, that just is another way of saying I'm old. But certainly in gamer terms, that's true. I get a lot of questions about all sorts of different things, and thought that it'd be a good idea to make a video series for you all where I can address your questions and give them more attention than I could if I'm kind of answering things in passing, while I'm playing a game or whatever else. So that's what we're doing here. And if you want to have your questions included in a future edition of Ask Kibler, be sure to either post them on Twitter with the hashtag AskKibler, or reply in the comments of this video with your questions. That's where I will be pulling my questions for future episodes of this. So anyway, let's get to it. The first question that I have today, I think it was pretty appropriate to start with, from Mace Martin, who asks, do you have any plans for your future as a YouTuber? It said, love your videos back when I played Hearthstone. Well, first of all, thank you, both for your question and for your compliment. And, well, yes, this. A big part of why I wanted to do this series is that, I'm sort of trying to figure out the sort of stuff, where do we go from here, right? What sort of things do A, people want to see, B, I want to make that I think would be cool. Between this and sort of getting back to doing the longer form game design critiques like I did on the recent balance change announcement for Hearthstone, I'm just trying to do more, right? More and different stuff, because as much as I enjoy, playing games and posting highlights of those games, that's just like one small thing in sort of the world of gaming stuff that I'm involved in, and I want to be able to showcase more of that to you. Frankly, if there are things that you all would like to see on my YouTube channel, that's where we are right now. Let me know. Again, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see from me, whether it's more stuff like this, which I hope you do, because I'm planning on doing more, more stuff like the video that I did earlier this week, or, whatever else. Let me know what you want to see. And it's a strange thing, because I only sort of incidentally got involved doing, YouTube content because it just seemed like it was such a natural fit with live streaming. You're largely taking a lot of what you were doing already, repackaging it in a certain way and getting it out to another audience. So it's very synergistic with streaming. And what more you can do with it is certainly a very open question. And I definitely want to do more stuff that is intended as sort of more produced stuff for YouTube, much like this video. So anyway, thank you very much for your question. Next up, we have a question from Ren Lassard, who asks, balancing competitive decks versus variety and more entertaining to watch decks must be tough for pro streamers. How do you balance them? Well, for me, I don't actually find it be a terribly difficult balance, because I play the kind of decks that I enjoy playing and I want to play. And I am always trying to come up with new decks and try to make them as competitive as I can while still remaining fun, entertaining to play and hopefully to watch. For me, what I've always enjoyed the most about collectible card games throughout my experiences with them, over the past 25 plus years, is deck building, is building decks. The challenge of figuring out how I want to approach the game, what sort of strategies that I want to employ, how to beat the things other people are playing. I've never really enjoyed just picking up a deck that someone else built, some sort of, top metagame deck, and playing that. I've done it. I certainly, over the course of my competitive career, had a lot of times when, I couldn't find a deck that I built that I enjoyed, that I thought was good enough, that, to bring to a tournament. And, some significant number of my successes in tournaments came from playing those decks rather than my own decks, or decks that I, help contribute to building. If you're a pro player, it's obviously very different than when you're a streamer. I consider myself not to really be a pro player of anything at this point. I am more or less a professional entertainer. And what I'm aiming to do, frankly, is to entertain people who are watching the stream. And I find the best way to do that is to play things that I enjoy, that I'm having fun with, that I'm having fun exploring and trying to build and improve. And I think that that's what people enjoy the most about watching my content, is seeing that process and, frankly, seeing me have fun. Because if I'm like, animated and excited because I'm doing cool things and my deck's working, then I think that people, they catch on to that energy and they enjoy that a lot more than if I'm sitting there, just playing an umpteenth millionth game of like Demon Hunter versus Warrior or whatever. And like, I can absolutely respect people who, want to do that. There was, like I said, a time when I was a focused competitive pro player and my goal was to win. Even if I would prefer to win with my own creations, my primary goal was to win. And now it's just very different. So I don't have trouble balancing that. Because I just lean very heavily on one side of that. So thank you for your question, Ren. Or Renee, as it may be, but the username is Ren. Next up, we have a question from M. Thornton10, who said, if you weren't streaming full-time or doing the occasional competition, what other career could you see yourself doing? Well, I've sort of had 3 separate jobs of sorts in gaming. I was a competitor, and then I was actually a game designer, and before becoming a streamer and commentator. So in that sort of vein, if I weren't streaming, if I weren't competing, I'd probably be designing games. I've really just always loved games my entire life, and I had sort of dreams when I was like in grade school, of like starting a game company with my friends who I played games with then. And at the time, that was like when I played Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I was like, oh, we'll make our own game company and we'll like create our own like modules and rule books and things like that. And obviously the sort of games that I've been involved with and the kind of things that, I designed in later parts of my life are very different than that. But it is kind of cool to think that I kind of ultimately got to the point where I had sort of like dreamed of as a kid. So yeah, I mean, I could certainly see myself designing games again. And I have some ideas for games sort of floating around in my head that I've never really gotten around to actually, prototyping and putting out there. So maybe I'll do that again. Maybe you'll see some BMK Gaming actual game releases instead of just me talking about how other people should design their games better. Next up, we have a question from Speedy Voodoo, who asks, did you ever play WoW or just the card game? Well, many people are ready for this meme of, well, I was the first level 70 on Ner'zhul, because I mentioned it quite a few times in some of my previous videos. But yes, I played a lot of World of Warcraft. I actually started playing WoW with some friends of mine. Well, actually, I started playing WoW when I was living in Atlanta. This is actually before I moved up to California. I started playing World of Warcraft and was like super, super into it. This was back when I was essentially a pro Magic player, but at that point, that mostly meant that I was a pro poker player because there really wasn't that much money to be made in Magic then. I wrote articles about Magic weekly. I wrote strategy articles for websites, but there weren't even that many competitions, and that just left me with a lot of free time. And I was looking for other sources of income, so I ended up playing semi-pro poker for about 6 months to a year. And around the end of that year was actually when WoW came out. So I had a lot of free time, and I spent it playing WoW. The very first month of WoW's retail release, I had 16 days played, which isn't saying that I played for like half of my waking hours, in that period. I played for half of the hours in the month that it released. And this wasn't like AFK on the, on the mailbox in Ironforge or whatever. This was like actually playing the game. So I was super, super, super hardcore into WoW. I was, not only the first level 70 on my server when the Burning Crusade came out, but, my guild was one of the top raid guilds. It was Lost Anarchy on Ner'zhul. We had like multiple, top 10 or top 11-ish. There's this controversy among the guild at the time. We were initially listed as like number 10 worldwide kill on Nefarian and Blackwing Lair. And then some other guild like had some other earlier time-stamped thing, so like we didn't end up getting it, but it was super fun. I loved my experience playing World of Warcraft. I tried to go back and play a little bit with Classic, and frankly, I'm actually kind of glad that I got so turned off by the queue times that I didn't really get back into it, because I could easily imagine, kind of like losing myself in WoW again. But I don't think you can really recapture the magic of that first experience. I think, for a lot of people, was so amazing about WoW was sort of the discovery of the world and, learning everything. And when you know it and go back to it, it's a very, very different experience. But yeah, I also not only played the WoW card games, I was actually the head developer of the original World of Warcraft card game. This is something that is, a lot of people, they're like, oh, you worked for Blizzard? No, I didn't work for Blizzard. I was working at the time for Upper Deck as a game designer. I had previously worked on the Versus System trade card game, had moved over to work on a couple other new games, including actually an Avatar: The Last Airbender game, which, that was just recently relaunched. And I, by the way, I was incredibly disappointed by the movie. We'll just pretend it didn't happen, but it came out like right around the time that I was like working on the game, and I was like, oh yeah, it's gonna be cool, and it was so bad that it didn't happen. Forget I said anything in this video. There was never a movie. Maybe they can make one someday. But anyway, yeah, I was doing that, and then ended up basically being the first person on the WoW TCG project at Upper Deck. Worked on a bunch of different systems for it, and there's a lot more I can go into in the story of sort of the WoW TCG. But anyway, I actually have these. I have some props. This is one of the hero cards, one of the oversized hero cards. Elendril. That's my character. That's my WoW character. So this is Todd McFarlane art. Todd McFarlane drew my WoW character. And this is one of the, you can see there, world premiere demonstration invitations. This was from 2006 at Gen Con, when we were first revealing the game to the world. And that art is the card Zygor Bladebreaker. Zygor was one of the guys who I played in a Warsong Gulch League. He was in my guild on my alt server, and I named a card after him, and that ended up being that card. But anyway, yes, played a lot of WoW, very heavily involved in WoW-related stuff. Never did work on Hearthstone itself, but fun fact, as we made the game, the WoW TCG from Upper Deck, we had creative development liaisons who we worked with from Blizzard on the game, and they handled approvals for various things, and one of those people was Ben Brode. Next up, we have a question from Sangui Turi, who says, hello, Brian. How did you get into the video game industry as a designer back in the day? What would you recommend to people who are studying to get into it? Have you ever thought or been asked to join Blizzard? If yes, what was your response? Thanks a lot. So I had a strange experience getting into game design. As I mentioned just a moment ago, my initial experience was working at Upper Deck. Initially, I came on to work on the Versus System card game, which was a Marvel DC crossover superhero battle game. And I actually got essentially recruited to work on that game after I won their first pro circuit tournament. Actually, you can't see the trophy. It's actually behind Talritha up there, but I have the trophy. I won their very first Versus System pro circuit. And then at the time I was like, as I mentioned, I like playing tons of World of Warcraft. Well, I'm telling you the timeline, I guess. I didn't tell that before. But at the time I was like playing a ton of World of Warcraft. I lived in Atlanta still, which is where I went to college, and was kind of just burnt out on everything that I was doing. I wasn't being terribly successful playing online poker anymore. There wasn't that much to do as a competitive Magic player at the time. Kind of getting like sick of that and just sort of generally wanting to find something else to do. And a friend of mine, Ben Rubin, who I had played a ton of Magic with, had practiced for Magic tournaments with for years, was working at Upper Deck and kind of messaged me and was like, hey, would you want to come out and work as a game designer on Versus System? And I was just like, you know what? Yes. And I sort of took that leap and went and started there as a game designer. So my path was a little bit weird, right? My path was, well, I was a successful competitive gamer, and specifically a successful competitor at this game that they hired me to do work on. And that's not going to be the average person's experience, right? But what I can say for, most people is that the best way to kind of try to get into game design is to demonstrate your both passion and aptitude at game design. A lot of people, they, when they say like passion, like, well, they're like, oh, I play tons of games. Like, well, so does everyone, right? What can really make you like stand out? And one of the things that you really can is either doing kind of like your own designs, right? Of course, you just make your own games, whether they are analog, like just paper games, like board games and things like that. Great way to showcase that you think about things in the right way, or even just writing about games, right? A lot of people who went on to work at, say, Wizards of the Coast on Magic the Gathering got, noticed by Wizards of the Coast, got attention, and ultimately, in many cases, got the job because they wrote articles or did videos about games and about game design and what they think about, different design decisions and cards and stuff. Much like the sort of videos that I have done about Hearthstone and my thoughts on their game design process. So show that you have the ability, to think about things in the right way, right? And that you are interested enough that you are doing these things, because just being someone who really likes games isn't a qualification for being a game designer, right? It's kind of necessary, but not sufficient. So really you need to go above and beyond that and show, that you not only are interested in these things, but you have the aptitude for them as well. As to whether I've been explicitly asked to work at Blizzard, it's kind of been vaguely brought up, inferred. I haven't ever been explicitly offered a job. But I don't think I'd really want to work at Blizzard, at least right now. I really enjoy what I do. I really like doing actual gameplay, game content, and videos and things like that. It gives me a lot of freedom and allows me to do the part of gaming that I enjoy the most, which is gaming. A lot of the time I spent doing game design work ends up being stuff that isn't as core to what I enjoy about games. Whereas streaming and doing content about games and sort of game critique is more in that wheelhouse. Anyway, thank you very much for your question. If I didn't thank you for your question in previous questions, I still thank you for your question, but I'm just kind of moving on. Next up, we have a question from Wizard Needs Food, which is a great Gauntlet reference, with the question, why did you stop LARPing and why did you decide to start again? For those who may not get this question, I have a background of playing live action role playing games. I've actually posted a bunch of pictures recently of some of my costumes and characters throughout the ages, because I've been playing since I was like 13 and actually played the same character in a Nero game. It was actually Nero Wildlands, just kind of a sub campaign that had multiple chapters that I played growing up in New England and then again in Georgia when I was in college. And then I stopped playing pretty much entirely after I moved out to California, which is, by the way, the reason that I pretty much stopped playing was that I moved away from the games that I knew and the people who I knew who were involved in the hobby, and didn't really find anything, at least initially, around where I was when I moved out here and moved to San Diego. Amusingly enough, a few years, well, like 10 years back at this point, my old game company, Stoneblade Entertainment, we actually had a deal to do a skateboarding card game that ended up being in a partnership with Rob Dyrdek. And Rob Dyrdek, had the show Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory, and there was actually an episode that they did that they wanted to kind of do this like promotion of the game, and they did this promotion of the game via this episode about LARPing, and they had this whole storyline in the show. I think it was called like Thy Kingdom of Fantasy Factory is the name of the episode. And they did this whole episode about LARPing where like the people from the show had to go through this like, challenge with these LARPers or whatever to get the ultimate prize, which was a thumb drive with the design of the game that we made for them on it. And amusingly enough, I ended up being on the show. I was actually the king at the end of all their challenges, who came out and gave them their prize. And there I actually met a couple of people who, were obviously involved in LARP stuff and pitched me on, they're like, hey, you should come try this game. But the game was run out of, a venue like near LA. And at the time I lived in San Diego, and I was like, I don't know. I'm not really, interested in like going that far to go play in a game or whatever. Well, fast forward 10 years, I've moved up to LA, and I was talking to my friend Ruben, and I was like, hey, you've been posting about this game that you're playing. Can you tell me more about it? And it was the same game. It was called Twin Mask, and this is like last fall or last winter. And I was like, tell me about this game. He gives this huge like info dump on it or whatever. And I'm just like, that sounds cool. He's like, yeah, there's these like practices in this park where you can go out and like, people go out and like spar and stuff. I'm like, oh, when's the next one? And he's just like, oh, tomorrow. So I went out to that and then, kind of just got back into it because I've always loved the combination of stuff in live action role playing. It has, the combination of like feeding my sort of like competitive drive of like the actual combat parts. Like there's a high level of physicality to it, and also the sort of the performative part of the actual like role playing and things like that. And yeah, it's just it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and I am very sad that the sort of state of the world with the pandemic has kept me from being able to do more with that throughout this year. But I'm very excited to get back to it when the world is safe again. Who knows where that would be. All right, next up we have a question from Jake the Cake, which is kind of terrifying. I see all these social media posts of like things that are bizarrely cakes, so I don't know if this person's actually a cake, but I wouldn't be surprised given what I've seen. How often do you find yourself feeling guilty for playing just for fun and not grinding to be the best? I never feel guilty. I definitely sometimes miss competition. There's a part of me that whenever I play a game, I kind of want to be the best at it. On the other hand, I feel like I put so much of myself into trying to be the best when I was playing in Magic that I just don't necessarily have the same drive that I did, anymore. There, there's obviously the like feeling of like, hey, I'm a very competitive person, and I'm playing this game, and it's the sort of game that I'm good at, and do I want to put in all this energy to try and be one of the best? And it's like I don't feel like I have that to prove anymore. I feel like I got enough trophies and rings and whatnot that I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty good at what I do, and I appreciate the fact that I don't have to sort of push and grind to try to be like a top competitor in a lot of these games that I'm playing anymore. And I can try to enjoy the aspects of them that are appealing to me, like the creativity and the deck building and things like that, without always feeling like I'm just pushing to try to be the best. Next up, we have a question from Hafu. Hi, Hafu, who says, how much time do you spend on or with Shiro a day? A lot. Well, usually dog o'clock is between 5:30 and 6. And by dog o'clock, I mean the point at which Shiro starts growling, barking, whatever it is, to get my attention, to get up and feed him. And then, I pretty much do that immediately. Yes, my lord. He beckons, I must reply. And then, I let him out. Then usually, I go and like do my workout and whatever else, and then take him for a walk. And then during the day, he often will like be in here with me while I'm streaming. Sometimes he'll just be like sitting on a dog bed underneath my desk. I actually very specifically got the place that I live in now because it is very conducive to being able to let Shiro out easily while I'm streaming. For a long time I lived in like an apartment, right? And when I need to take Shiro out during the day, you just like take him out like down multiple flights of stairs and stuff. But I actually have a sliding door to like kind of like a dirt backyard area just through my bedroom where I can just go and like, even if I'm streaming in the middle of a game, I can just go open it and let Shiro out and everything. And then, I take him out again in the evening, and then pretty much after my stream's over, we just hang out, sit in the couch, watch TV. He licks my face, whatever, until it's time to go to bed, and then repeat. So he's a very big part of my life, and frankly, like having his demands to answer has been something that has given me sort of purpose and meaning during what is otherwise a very like difficult time with the whole sort of pandemic and everything going on. There's a structure to my day which is determined by Shiro's demands, and as much as I kind of joke about him being a little tyrant, I really do appreciate having that. So next we have a question from Tim 306. What is your general opinion on stream snipers? How do you deal with them? And if you think your opponent might snipe your stream? My general opinion is I don't really care. As I was discussing before, I'm not really typically playing, to be as hyper competitive as I can be these days. Mostly, I think if someone's stream sniping me, they're like just ruining their own experience, because the fun of, playing a game is that, you like have the challenge of figuring out the problems that you're solving during the game. If you're going to just like stream snipe someone and use the information you get from that to give yourself an advantage, you're just cheating yourself, right? Now, obviously, it's very different in like an actual competitive environment. If I were streaming, say, a tournament, right, and someone were to be stream sniping me, that I think is just like flat out cheating. I definitely frown upon that much more than like if someone's just going to come, stream snipe me or whatever when I'm streaming just ladder games or whatnot. Overall, I feel like it's a negative thing, but it doesn't personally bother me when I'm just playing, more or less for fun on my stream. But I think it is definitely, a violation of the spirit of the game, and certainly a violation of just fairness, especially if you're doing it in a more competitive setting. Next up, we have a question from Daniel Jepson. It says, do you ever miss playing Magic on a professional or just a higher level? Yeah, I mean, I definitely miss competing, and I think there's been a lot of discussion in the Magic community on social media recently, given that major events have obviously been canceled for the foreseeable future due to the current global pandemic. And there's been a lot of people talking about like what they miss, and a lot of people talking about, well, what I really miss is just having an excuse to go get together with my friends and hang out, right? I have so many friendships that I've made with people across the country, across the world, as a result of competing in Magic. Like just so many people who I would have never met, who are a lot of my closest friends, clearly people who have very similar interests, like-minded individuals who I really like spending time with, discussing ridiculous things with, and competing with. Like I haven't really considered myself a serious competitive Magic player for, 7 years now. I think the last time I was regularly competing in every tournament was around 2013. But I have still made a point of going to some events. Just last year, I went to the Pro Tour in Richmond, Virginia, which was the last event they called the Pro Tour. I just went. It cost me more to go there than I could reasonably expect to win, but I just wanted to go and compete because I enjoy competing and be able to see my friends and hang out. And I really enjoyed that whole experience. And I really missed that experience. And, I was definitely looking forward to this year going to, maybe the Grand Prix in Las Vegas, right? Going to some of these just events to be able to spend time both competing, but more importantly, getting a chance to see my friends. And that's definitely something that I miss more than anything else, really, since I have stopped playing competitive Magic. Next up, we have a question from OTV98. Said, what music are you listening to recently? Anything you would recommend? So a lot of people who follow me on YouTube have generally the impression that, I'm really big into classical music. It's kind of not necessarily totally related to the question, but I think it's something that I want to explore. So the reason I actually have classical music on my YouTube videos, the reason I have music at all, is because I just compulsively click my mouse all the time. And when we were initially doing videos for YouTube, wanted to have something to cover up that just obnoxious clicking sound. The sort of issues of copyright are obviously something that, especially with recent sort of DMCA violations that have been floating around, people are much more aware of now. But we specifically used classical music because you can find actual songs that are in the public domain that have like military performances, so they're copyright free, in order to use them for these sort of soundtracks to the YouTube videos. So that is why there's classical music on all my YouTube videos, and also the fact that classical music is rarely something that'll offend anyone, right? Like you play some sort of other genre of music, whether it's electronic music or rock or hip hop or whatever, there's gonna be someone who's like, oh, I don't like this. Whereas you'll very rarely find someone who's like, I hate Beethoven. Like, that's just not really, a genre of music people seem to be, opposed to in the same way. But as to the music that I listen to, I mostly listen to electronic music myself. Recently, I've been listening to the new Gareth Emery album. Literally just this morning, I took like a hour and a half, 2 hour walk and listened to his new album, The Lasers, pretty much on repeat. It's a really, really good album. I think that the songs are great, and the lyrics are really really resonant, given a lot of what's going on in the world right now and in my life. Huge fan of Elon Bluestone. He's a tremendous producer who does a lot of awesome stuff. His track "Will We Remain" is one of my favorite tracks of the past like several years. I still listen to it all the time. But yeah, huge fan of a lot of people on the Anjuna Beats label. Those of you who follow live streaming, probably a lot of you, but like there's obviously been a growth in live streaming of music on Twitch during the whole pandemic situation. Dave Dresden from Gable in Dresden has been doing like 3 nights a week. I think it might even be 4 nights a week. I don't know, a lot of live streams on his channel throughout this entire period, and he's probably the person who I've tuned into the most for live streaming music over the course of this whole experience. So those I think are some great recommendations. You want to check them out. And Anjuna Beats, by the way, actually has a deal with Twitch. They have a partnership with them. So if you're a streamer who's watching this, you can find Anjuna Beats Twitch approved playlist on Spotify. You can play that and not worry about DMCA requests on your channel because it's all automatically approved. Check that out. Anyway, thank you very much for your question. Next up, we have a question from C Merp 950. What's a choice you made that keeps you up at night? Drinking too much caffeine. I do that a lot. And next up, we have a question from Egolas, who said, "Hi, I'm in my 2nd trimester of game design school and want to create card games in the future. As a frequent TCG and CCG player, what is the most common mistake you see in new card games? Not so much microtransactions, but more so gameplay or visual design." I would say, I think that the most common issues that you see are people making the game too complicated. I think that there is a tendency for a lot of designers to make games, in many cases, for themselves. And if the goal of your game is to be commercially successful, it's important that your game is accessible. It's important that it isn't overwhelming for people if they encounter it without like a really deep background in games. Obviously, there's some games that they are not intended to be a broad commercial success. They are more sort of like niche indie style games that like they are very much for a very specific audience. But I think that when people make, say, a game that is heavily targeted at, say, like a competitive audience, right? And I had a question that I was going to talk about regarding like Artifact, for instance, that I feel like this really applies to. I feel like one of the big problems that Artifact had was that the game was just way too hard, right? A lot of people are like, well, Artifact failed because it wasn't free to play. It's like, well, if you look at like the numbers for Artifact, like a bunch of people bought Artifact and then just like immediately stopped playing it. And that's not really a symptom of like, oh, it's because of the paywall. The symptom is, well, they played it and they stopped, right? And there's obviously any number of various factors that go into this sort of thing. But I think that there are a lot of times people decide, they're like, okay, like I want to make like a game for like heavily competitive players, right? Like I want to make a game for like really hardcore players. And the problem with that, and this is a problem that actually Versus System, which I worked on years ago, ran into, there aren't that many of those players. And in many cases, when you have a game which you're like, I'm going to make this for a super hardcore audience, and I'm going to make it so that the best player almost always wins, right? And then, you have your already really small audience of super hardcore competitive type players, and you're excluding, a bunch of other people. And then you also have the sort of natural like shedding off of the people who end up just realizing they're not good enough to play the game, that the game's too hard for them, right? And I think that this is actually tied to another mistake, which is viewing randomness as the enemy. There was one question which I got that I was thinking of putting in here, which was someone asking like, how would you fix Magic's land problem? And people view the randomness that exists in the resource system of Magic as a problem. And I would argue, and many people would argue, that it is a feature, not a bug, that games have randomness that can decide them. And a big part of what is important about that is that if you have a game that that there isn't enough randomness for someone to feel like it's possible that randomness was the reason that they lost, they will get disillusioned and choose not to play again in many cases, because they're like, well, I'm not having fun, I keep losing. And you can say, well, you should just get better. It's like, well, you can say that, and if there's sufficient incentives, like a tournament structure or whatever, maybe they will. But that's not really a great appeal to get people to play your game, of well, just try harder, just be smarter, right? So a lot of games end up getting lost in that. They feel like they're trying to do a very specific thing for a very specific audience, and view the randomness that exists inherently in card games as the enemy, as opposed to a big part of the appeal of the entire genre to most of the people who play those games, even if they don't know it, right? A lot of people will rail against the randomness that exists in whether Hearthstone or Magic, but actually, a lot of their the fun that they derive from those games comes from the elements of randomness that exist within them. Because if it weren't for randomness, you wouldn't have the fun, cool surprises, or the big, exciting, lucky moments, or anything like that. So, anyway, thank you for your question. It's one I get quite a lot, and I hope that was a good answer for you. Next up, we have a question from AZYXA. Azixa? Hey, Brian, how many days a week do you lift? One rest day? Also, how many days do you eat fish? For those who don't know, I have recently been actually streaming some of my workouts. I've been getting pretty heavily back into fitness, and trying to just take better care of myself, trying to get stronger, doing a lot of weightlifting. I was fortunate enough to get a whole weight rack and everything set up in my garage, right before the whole pandemic situation hit. And I'm very excited to be able to actually be able to keep in shape when other people aren't able to go to the gym. I work out. I do weightlifting 3 days a week. I do cardio at least 3 other days a week. I typically do an hour on my stationary bike while playing games on my iPad. And I feel like while there may be more efficient ways to spend my time doing cardio, like high intensity interval training type stuff, I find it's more important to find something that I enjoy and I know that I can stick to, rather than something which may just be objectively superior in some sense, but I'm less likely to stick to. And frankly, I think that's a good recommendation overall for any kind of fitness or diet plan or whatever, is do something that you can stick to, because if you don't, then no matter how effective it might be, it's not going to work for you. Also, I typically eat fish probably 2 to 3 days a week. I usually get a big piece of salmon at the grocery store. I actually have some from the farmer's market I need to cook today. And, it kind of depends on whether I make it out to the farmer's market and pick some stuff up and what they have when I do. Next up, we have a question from Tassos Patsis, who says, how do you keep up in life when you have a famous career in streaming? Do you often get recognized? Often, no. It does happen, and certainly happens more often in certain contexts. When I'm at any kind of gaming-related event, it certainly happens much more often. I do occasionally have weird things. I literally, when I moved into my last house, I went to the grocery store, and I ran into this guy in the grocery store literally the first day I moved into this neighborhood, and he recognized my Shiro shirt, right? And then he looks up and he's like, clearly he's just like, oh, I know that dog, and looks up and is like, I know that person. And then another time recently, I was just going out to dinner at a restaurant or lunch or whatever, or somewhere in Santa Monica, which is where I live now, and someone was just like, hey, are you Brian Kibler? But that's more a rarity, right? At like I said, at gaming events, at a convention, or when I went to the LARP events, right? There's a lot of people involved in the gaming space there. Much more likely to find someone who ends up recognizing me. But on a day-to-day basis, it's very, very rare. Especially when I'm not really going out these days very much, because, well, it's dangerous. Next up, we have a question from Halfway Clever, who said, which company do you think has been more influential or impactful in your life, Blizzard or Wizards of the Coast? I have to say it's Wizards of the Coast. Magic was just such an incredibly formative experience and game in my life. If it weren't for Magic, I never would have gotten involved in competing. I never would have gotten involved in game design. it's sort of unclear how like all this would have developed, right? Like magic was a huge part of what sort of like kept me in sort of like in tune with the gaming world in general, and like part of why I probably started playing WoW in the first place, and all of this kind of cascaded off of the fact that magic was just this really, really important part of my life for so long. I started playing magic when I was 13. And now I'm almost 40. So it's really hard to say that anything else could be more impactful sort of in my life than that, right? Like it was, a huge part of why I've had every job that I've ever had in my life. Even now, like streaming Hearthstone, like I only really was able to become a streamer because people knew me from Magic. Yeah, and this is not related to this question specifically, but I get a lot of people who ask me like, oh, what tips would you give to like someone who's trying to start to be a streamer? And I'm like, well, my own experience is very different than the average person, right? Like if I want to give you tips to like to emulate my own experience, it's, well, go back in time about 20 years, start playing a game and have it consume your entire life, become one of, the most recognized and successful competitive players in this game, use that to become a designer of other games that, get you further recognition across, the industry and the world and whatnot, and then start streaming. And then people be like, I know that guy, I'm going to watch a stream. So it's very, very different than like starting from nothing and trying to start your stream, right? So yeah, I mean, magic is why I'm able to do basically everything that I do in my life now, and has been the single biggest influence in my entire life, like outside like my parents, right? So I don't think that particular one, despite me being more involved with Hearthstone now, in sort of the grand scheme of things, is even really close. And our final question, truly a absolutely important question that we can ask of anyone. What is your ideal burrito? I actually had a burrito today. I love burritos. Burritos are one of my favorite foods. One of the few things that has been constant throughout this entire pandemic is me eating one of these breakfast burritos almost every weekend, frequently 2 of them. I really like breakfast burritos in particular. I think breakfast burritos are fantastic. And specifically, I got a breakfast burrito with pinto beans, chorizo, eggs, and cheese. And of course, you have to have your control over like both which type of salsa and how much salsa you put on any given bite of the burrito, depending on your mood. So that's what I had today. That's what I've had almost every weekend for the past 4 months. And it's really helped me get through this whole situation. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments about any of these topics, or what you'd like to hear me answer on a future edition of Ask Kibler. So again, thank you all so very much for contributing your questions, and I look forward to seeing the next ones. Thanks for watching.